Welcome back. Today in the shop we have a 2007 Ford Edge. It's got the 3.5 liter V6. Creeping up on 200,000, we're going to be replacing the spark plugs. This procedure is going to be very similar to the Ford Flex. However, I just want to take a moment and demonstrate the process on the Ford Edge for those of you who may be considering taking on this task. So let's do it to it. We're going to start by removing the air cleaner box along with the intake ductwork. You'll see right there in the back we have a single hose clamp. I'll be using a stubby screwdriver to loosen that up. Okay, next let's take and unplug the electrical connection. As you see that red tab at the bottom, you're going to simply pull that tab out like so and then push up. See, this tab is a lock to keep you from pushing down on the retaining clip. Once you pull that back, you can simply depress that. Now we're going to take and pop these two clips. Okay, then if you follow the intake duct down, you got this breather hose on the front valve cover. It's got a little white tab. You pull on that like so. Next, if you come around to the back side, you got this one hose here. Then we should be able to simply pull up on the air cleaner. We have to pop off the throttle body. This has been on there for almost 200,000 miles now, so I believe we're the first ones to venture in. Now we could always start with the front bank. However, we got to remove this upper intake plenum, so I'm just digging my way backwards. As you can see, this drive-by-wire has a similar setup. They can be stubborn sometimes. You have this one hose here. Pretty sure it goes to evaporation. However, it has a push-in style retainer. Push that in and pop it out. And just simply put it up and out of the way like so. Next we're going to take and remove the retaining bolt right underneath the throttle body on that bracket. Right there. It's an 8mm. Using a 1/4 inch drive with about a 5-inch extension. Might be a 4-inch. If you go to the back side of the manifold, you'll see a retaining bracket there with an 8mm retaining bolt. That previous extension was a 4-inch. On this one I'm going to be using a 10-inch extension. Same setup with the 1/4 inch ratchet, 8mm socket. It feels as though that retainer bolt will stay in the intake in the upper plenum without falling out. This next step, if you take notice, you got this vacuum hose in the back. It runs over to the brake booster. It's a real bear to get to if you try to remove that retaining clip where it's at. So what I found makes it a little easier is right here behind the battery. You see where it goes to that retaining clip, and that hose doesn't have a clamp on it. However, you just grab that clip like so, pull it off. Now removing that retaining clip just makes it a little more easy, more pliable to move around, if you know what I mean. You grab both ends and wiggle it and it pops apart. However, you can simply just yank it from the intake side and it should come off with a barb. Just like so. Okay, we're just about ready to remove the upper plenum. However, we got these hoses here. This one here is your coolant overflow. So you got these plastic retainers. Just pull them off to the side. Now they're made to push in and not come out, so you don't want to tear this hose, so be careful when you're removing that. Now these bottom ones, you can take and remove these plastic retainers. However, in the past I had them break on me because they get brittle with all the heat in the engine compartment. So I just take and I take the tape off them. Use that same pick. Now you don't want to accidentally cut anything, so just be sure to get the tape. go, and you get that tape to come off like so. And the same thing on this big harness. There's a retainer underneath that one as well. They're real bare to pull that intake. Okay, now to give ourselves a little more room, we're going to take and move this solenoid out of the way. I'm going to take and push that on the clip, pull it out. Then you got this little tab that sticks out the back side there. Take and pull that towards us like so. You can see how brittle these looms are. Okay, we're really close. There's a hose in the back that goes down to the back valve cover. However, that one will pop off once we start removing the intake plenum. If you have a large amount of debris up here, take and blow it off with compressed air or something. This one isn't too bad. So I think I'm ready to start removing the retaining bolts. And we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8mm as well. I'm using the 4-inch extension. Keep note of the lengths. They're all the same length except for this one upper one, as you can see. Okay, now we're going to take and remove the upper intake plenum. Like I mentioned previously, you want to make sure you got no debris that's going to fall down. So, and you got that one hose in the back. It might be a little stubborn. However, for the most part, it looks like we got it. Just want to proceed with caution, you know. There you go. Okay. So you got that one hose in the back, it should pop up and off. There's one more connection in the back of this intake. Forgot all about it. I'm going to take and unplug that one. I'll give you a shot of that once we get this out. Now I think the room is clear. Just like so. It's just a little push-in tab. You pull it out. And as you can see, with the upper intake plenum removed, you got complete access to those rear coil packs and spark plugs. What I like to do now is cover up these lower intake ports, because you do not want to drop anything down inside them, otherwise you will cause internal damage. Okay, I got some new pieces of paper towel. I know this may seem like a waste. You don't want to ever drop anything down inside there. Okay, I'm going to give you a demonstration on one of these front plugs, and then you can just repeat the process throughout. You see this red clip here? Take and push that forward like so. You don't try not to break them. They are real brittle. Once that's back, push down on that retainer and unplug it like so. If you have any debris around that coil, take and blow it out with compressed air. Now we're going to use that same 8mm setup that we used throughout on the process and remove this retaining bolt. Once you have that retaining bolt removed, grab the coil and give it a twist as you pull upwards and remove the coil like so. Now I got a 5/8 spark plug socket. Make sure you got a good grommet inside, because we're going to have to pull that spark plug up and out of the hole using a 6-inch extension. I'm going to take and remove the spark plug. And there we have it. Take notice of how much of a gap we have on this electrode. You can see how just a basic spark plug change is going to drastically improve how this engine runs and the fuel mileage. Okay, just as a demonstration, I got the new plug on the left, the old plug on the right. I got my spark plug gap checker. As you can see, this one goes up to 80 thousandths, and I can stick it in there with no problem. So it's well above 80 thousandths. The new ones, I've checked and compared them all to each other. I can fit the 45 thousandths in there. The 50 thousandths get snug, and I don't want to force it through there, but it's somewhere around 50 thousandths. These iridium spark plugs, they come pre-gap, so you shouldn't really have to mess with the gap. However, it doesn't hurt to check and compare all 6 to one another. That way you know what you got before putting it in, because you never know if it got damaged during assembly and whatnot. So a visual inspection and checking the gap might save you. Now you can use the plugs that you're choosing. I always recommend OEM replacements, because as you've seen, those were in here for almost 200,000 miles and the vehicle really wasn't missing yet. However, once your electro gap starts getting that big, it puts a lot of strain on the coil packs. So I'm glad we got to this when we did. At this point, if you choose to use never sees on your threads, just apply a little bit. Be careful not to get it down to an electrode, otherwise you could short it out. So now we're going to take and place the spark plug down into its well. And always start it in by hand, and it should go in relatively easy all the way down until it's snug by hand. And then we'll take and run it down snug with a ratchet. Now I'll look up the torque spec. Okay, these get torqued to 11 foot-pounds. Now that we have the spark plug installed and torqued to spec, we're going to take and inspect the coil pack. Like I mentioned previously, this vehicle didn't have any drivability issues. However, it was lacking on the gas mileage and whatnot. And looking at those spark plugs, I can see why. I want you to take and inspect the boot, make sure there's no moisture and whatnot. And if you see moisture, signs of moisture, you may have to see where it's getting in. Sometimes it's the weather seal along the hood, and just inspect that. Clean any debris out. And if you need to, you can replace just the boot. These pop off and you can buy a kit, comes with the spring and whatnot. However, I feel that these ones are in good shape. So now we're going to take and apply some marine style grease. This gives it a weather tight seal. You can use dielectric grease and whatnot. However, I get this through Wells Manufacturing and I've had pretty good luck with it. I just apply a fair amount in there like so. Now we install the coil. Then the retaining bolt. Run that down tight. Now you don't want to over tighten these. I'll put the torque spec in the description. I got a pretty good feel for them. Then we'll take and reinstall the electrical connection. Lock it in place. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now I'm going to repeat that process on the remaining 5 cylinders, and then we'll take it to the next step. The torque spec on these retaining bolts are 62 inch-pounds. Okay, I just completed the remaining cylinders. Everything's torqued to spec. All our retaining plugs are plugged back in. One little tech tip, I guess you could call it. When you go to remove these plugs, what I find is easier if you push in on the plug a little bit and then push down on that clip. It makes it a lot easier to release. So push in a little bit, push down, and pull out. Now we're going to take and remove our rags. Just take and wipe the top of this manifold. You shouldn't have to scrape it. You know, it should be relatively clean. As you can see, even after all these miles, it's just like an O-ring style gasket. I like to just take a peek down into the cylinders to make sure nothing fell in. The engine looks relatively clean. What I mainly wanted to do is I can't see down into those ports. I want to be certain that I didn't drop anything down inside there, guys, because it's critical. It'll be catastrophic. Okay, now we're going to take and reinstall the upper intake plenum. The new gaskets are pretty straightforward. You know, it's individual gaskets, there's 3 of them. You just pop them in and make sure the little clips are in. Now we're going to make sure we got our hose going up behind our brake booster like so. You know, don't force nothing. Everything should fall in place relatively easy for the most part. Want to make sure you reach back, get that hose started. You got that one plug that you got to plug in. I'm going to do that right away, just to make sure it's not being pinched. That might be the hardest part, is lining that plug up. I like to get that back retaining bolt started in there. Not sure if you can see it from there, but I found this through trial and error. It's just much easier to get it started before installing these upper bolts into the plenum. Same thing with this one. Now I'm not going to tighten them up, I'm just simply starting them. Because sometimes when you tighten everything up in place, there's a little bit of wiggle room in these retaining bolts and they're not lined up perfect. Okay, so the things you want to make sure you do before tightening the plenum down: make sure you got that back hose installed on the rear valve cover and your plug isn't pinched. So I just simply plug it back in, start your retaining bolts slightly. Remember, you got one on-ball bolt. That's this one right here. The rest of them I'm just going to set in place. I'm just going to spin these down with my fingers for now. Now the torque sequence for this upper intake plenum, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And it's 89 inch-pounds. I like to just run them down snug in the same sequence. Now we'll start torquing. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, since I have this 4-inch extension on it, I'm going to jump right down to this lower bolt. These are all just extra supports for that plenum because it's only plastic. Let's get that nice and snug. I'm assuming it's right around the same torque specs. 89 inch-pound. Install the longer one. Just not back here. Snug that up. Taking the solid drive-by wire, make sure it's plugged all the way down in. Unlock the retaining. Put the reservoir hose back in place. Before I put this back in place, it might be easier for me to get my hand back in there. Maybe that's an easier step to do this first before pulling that back brake booster hose off. Make sure you got that hose. It goes up and in all the way. Just like so. We'll swing this down and around. Plug that back in. And plug the electrical connection. Now since we removed the tape earlier, I'm just going to throw a couple zip ties around. Like so. Just take and snip these off. Just make it look better at taking a spin. Zip ties down to the bottom. Like so, and then I'll just throw 2 more on here. While I had this part, we purchased a new air filter as well. Okay, now we'll take and install the air filter box along with the intake hose. These 3 clips go back into here, just like so. And reach down in here, get your hose pushed on, get this up where it belongs. Put that on, put this down in place. Electrical connection and relax the tab. Over here you got this hose. Push that back in. Now to tighten up that rear hose clamp. I know it seems like an odd position, but put your hands up and over the top of that reservoir and be careful. You don't want to break anything. Just like so. Okay, I'm just going to give it a once over. Okay, let's start it up and see what happens. Okay, the motor runs, it's sounding better. If you notice when I first started it up, it had that little stumble. And that's because the plugs had become saturated. They were dry. And then once the fuel saturated the cylinders and whatnot, they all started firing. And now it's running nice and smooth. Now this vehicle has a bad motor mount. We're going to be replacing that one next. It's the rear torque strut, they call it. It's got a bad bushing in it. So I'm going to let this run for a little bit, and I'll get right back at it. I just want to be certain it's not a vacuum leak. I hear the noise, but this vehicle hasn't been ran in a couple days and it's really cold. I'm almost certain it's the alternator belt. I'll show you a quick way to tell. So I got some water in a bottle. Hook this up. And as you can hear, it quiet it up. It's the power steering belt. And that. And as you can hear, the noise is coming back from that belt. That means it's most likely pretty dry. I use water so it's dissipating quickly. I'm Will Robinson from Robinson's Auto. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Stay tuned.